Welcome to the Story Wheel. This is the story for spring equinox, and it is the story of Ostara and the white hare. This is the tale of Ostara. Easter? Ostara? White hares? Easter bunnies? Eggs? What a mixed up, muddled up mess. But here's how. The hares and the bunnies and Ostara and even the eggs got stirred up in the big old story cauldron. Now, Ostara, she is the goddess of spring. Now, there's a few goddesses of spring around, to be fair, but she is supposedly the Germanic goddess of spring and dawn and fertility. And although she was celebrated for all these energetic qualities, she was in truth, well, quite lazy. She liked to stay underground for most of the year. Apart from spring equinox, when she was supposed to come up, she was supposed to come up at spring equinox, when all of the animals and the plant beings would bow down before her radiant majesty. But half the time, she'd lie in. It was cosy down there in the warm earth, with the boiling fires of the earth below her and the streams rushing through the rock walls, keeping her abode at a cosy ambient temperature. Yes, she was snug, and she didn't want to get up. But above ground, there was a spring messenger. The hare. The hare was the messenger assigned to Ostara to remind her that the day of the equinox was upon the earth and it was time for her to get up. And every year he would stand above the place where the goddess was sleeping, and the big old hare, he would pound on the ground with his strong back feet. And Ostara would stretch and look up and roll her eyes and go, "Oh, go away!" And the hare, he would bang and bang and bang on the ground, and he'd say, "Get up, you lazy goddess. We need you up here. Come on." And Ostara would huff and roll out of bed and throw on her golden gown, and she would work her way up the path from the underground and into the world. And when the hare saw her, he would run away. Because who wants to be faced with an angry goddess who's just woken up from a 3-season sleep in a cosy place under the ground? Not that hare. He was not stupid, so he would run, run, run. And Ostara, once she was up, well, you know how it is. You get up, you get going, and it's all good. And so she would get about the business of sowing seed and bringing sunshine and bringing longer days and shorter nights and warmth. And the daffodils would start to flower, and the birds would start making their nests, and the hares would, well, the hares would do what the hares would do, but we don't like to talk about that. And the season was underway. Spring equinox was done. And the goddess was up, and she would stay up. But once the days got too hot and too long, well, she would start to wilt, and she'd yearn for sleep once more, so she'd head back down the path to her underground bed. While the hares would do what the hares would do, only quietly, and in the shade, lolling and lounging about. Now, this was all very well, and it carried on very well until one long, 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 cold, cold, cold winter. And Ostara thought, "I am not getting up." Oh no! It didn't matter how much that hare jumped and jumped and leapt about her head. No! She wasn't having it. Not this year. So she put her head under her pillow and she shut her eyes. So above ground, well, the winter went on and on and on. things were supposed to happen, and they didn't happen. The birds were supposed to build their nests, but it was too cold. They couldn't fly. Ice would form on their wingtips, and any aeronaut worth his salt knows you cannot fly with ice on your wingtips. And so here, when he gathered some friends, he was a bit cunning, many friends, and together they gathered over Ostara's bed, and they drummed, and they bet, and they leapt. They made a hell of a racket. And my goodness me, that goddess, she shook her head, and she pulled her hair, and she threw on her golden gown, and she stormed up out of there. She was furious. Those ruddy hairs, making all this racket. I don't want to get up. But she emerged onto the ground, and those hairs, they scattered. They were out of there. Except for one. One hair stood at a distance and watched the goddess with a very solemn face. He was a tall, big Jack Hare, and he was different from the rest. Firstly, he wasn't running away, and secondly, he was pure white and incredibly handsome. He had incredibly long ears and incredibly powerful long back legs. And he just sat watching her, which kind of bugged her and kind of intrigued her, so she started towards him. But as she moved, a small flutter off at the side of the path caught her eye, and just there lay a small hen sparrow, frozen, half dead, starved because spring had not come as it was supposed to. And something in Ostara's heart, maybe was it guilt? Maybe. But something broke a little, and she leant down and she scooped up the wee sparrow. Was she too late? She breathed her warm breath on the sparrow. Nothing. So she breathed a second breath. And the sparrow twitched just a little. And so Ostara breathed a third breath, because we all know magic happens in threes. And then all at once, the hen sparrow fluttered its wings and flapped. And before the goddess knew what was happening, it had jumped up on her shoulder and was sitting there quite happily. Now, Ostara went back to look for the hare, but he'd gone. And so she carried on about her spring business with her new companion on her shoulder. And quickly she fell in love with this little hen sparrow. She'd never had a proper friend before. She'd always had to do everything for everyone else. It was up to her to make the daffodils come up. It was up to her to snort the snowdrops out. It was up to her to make sure the magnolias bloomed when they were supposed to, and that the apple blossom was there for when the bees wanted it. It was a huge job. But now she had a companion who would be with her all of the time. And they loved each other. They were best friends. And when it was time to go down, the little bird would go down with her and spend its time tucked up on Ostara's pillow or scratching around for worms and bugs to keep it sustained during the long waiting period before they would both arise for the next spring equinox. The Jack Hares, they were making a racket, but Ostara was feeling better these days. She had a little friend, so they both prepared to come above ground, and the Jack Rabbit ran as usual, except for the one. There was the handsome white hare, and this time he came towards the goddess. But it was not the goddess that he was looking at. Oh no, he was looking at the little hen sparrow on her shoulder. And he started to do his spring hare dance. first with slow turns and sweeps of his huge back feet. Then stamping and leaping and twirling and tossing his ears and doing somersaults and backflips. He was dancing and dancing and dancing, and his dance was a thing of glory. No Jack here had ever performed a dance like this before. And the little hen sparrow, she was transfixed. She couldn't take her eyes off the hare, and he in turn could not take his eyes off her. And as Ostara looked between the two of them, she recognised what this was. This was love. This was true love. And Ostara was jealous. She was jealous. But the bold Jack here, he came and he stood right in front of her, and the little sparrow jumped down and she went and sat next to him. And although Ostara was jealous, something inside her told her she had to let go. All of this beauty, all of this spring, the fact that the sparrow had been with her all this time, and the sparrow hadn't had a chance to find a mate and do what birds do in spring, and the hare, he didn't have a mate, and he needed to do what hares do. And so Ostara leant down and she kissed the top of the little sparrow's head in blessing, and she said, "What will be, will be." And with a flurry of feathers, the little sparrow had gone, and in its place stood the most beautiful Jill, a she-hare. And without a backward glance, the hares just bounded off, leaving Ostara quite alone, feeling sad, feeling glad. She didn't know how she felt, but somehow she knew it was right. And so she went about her spring thing. And then as the days got too long and hot, she went down underground and went to sleep. Now, you know what happened. One morning, spring again, spring, time to get up. But the goddess was depressed. Another round of giving and sowing and not seeing the harvest, because that wasn't up to her. So she went up, dragging her feet, feeling cold inside and out. And the sun was low. It stayed low. The ground remained cold, and the wind carried its winter chill. And where Ostara walked, nothing bloomed in her wake. However, all was not lost. As she came to a clearing, she heard a noise, many feet beating the earth. And looking up, she saw she was surrounded by a flurry of white. But it wasn't snow. It was white hares, all twirling and dancing in ceremony. When they saw her, they bowed down to her glory. And they moved apart to make a path down the centre of the clearing. And there, smiling up at her, stood the handsome Jack with the she-hare by his side. And they parted, and behind them was a nest, a beautiful nest. It was made of fur and feathers and twigs and hay and straw and soft moulded leaves and an old bit of baling twine from the farmer next door. Nothing's perfect. And there, as she looked into that nest, she saw eggs. Eggs! Eggs. Now, Ostara was confused. She knew that hares did not lay eggs. But these were hare-sized eggs. They weren't bird eggs. and they were not sparrow eggs, that's for sure. And Ostara looked, as she looked with wonder, one of the eggs started to lean and move and jiggle. And she could hear a little tapping noise coming from inside the egg. And then it started to crack. And as the egg cracked, what appeared? Well, it wasn't what you would think. Instead of a beak, it was a pair of little legs thumping against the shell. And as the shell fell away, well, there lay the most divinely perfect leveret you could ever imagine. And as Ostara saw this, she was overcome with a flush of joy and wonder. And she went over and she picked up this little baby hare. As she held it to her face, she was filled with happiness. And then she smiled. And then she laughed as the fluff of the leveret tickled her nose and cheeks. And she felt a sudden uprising of joyous energy, and as she did, the leaves started to unfurl, and the earth started to warm, and the daffodils rose up, and the bluebells flushed blue. Spring equinox was here in its full glory. And Ostara knew she couldn't keep this little leveret. It wasn't hers, it was the proud parents', so she laid it gently back in the nest. And as she did so, the other eggs started to jiggle and move. This was going to be a great family. And so Ostara recognised in herself the sense of joy, and she knew that she could see this wonder every year. The magic of the hares and the nests and the eggs and the leverets. By her act of generosity, by allowing the bird to join with the hare, she knew that they would carry on forever. And that, my friends, is why spring equinox and the hares and the eggs and Ostara are all connected at the spring equinox. The end.